first time Danielle Freeman stood in that crowded courtroom, the wooden floorboards seemed to tremble beneath her feet. She was only 27, a single mother from a forgotten neighborhood. And yet every eye was locked on her, as if she had come to put the entire system on trial. Across the aisle sat the school principal who had tried to expel her little girl. A man cloaked in authority but cracking under the weight of his own lies. What Danielle revealed that day shook more than one room. It rattled a whole town's belief in what justice really meant. And as we walk with her through every tear, every late night, and every silent prayer that led to that moment, remember this: stories like hers are not just entertainment. They are testimony. If you feel the ground shifting under you as you listen, stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe. Not just for the story, but to keep these voices unbroken, these chains of truth intact. The paper was folded in half, shoved carelessly between a half-empty lunchbox and a stack of math worksheets marked with doodles. Danielle Freeman almost missed it. She had come home late, hands raw from the register at the grocery store where she worked, her bones aching from standing too long. She pulled out her daughter's backpack with the quiet efficiency of ritual, empty the crumbs. Check the folders, refill the pencils. But that evening, something about the stiff white sheet caught her eye. Then her daughter Jasmine was curled on the couch watching cartoons, her small frame swallowed up by a blanket with faded stars. Danielle smoothed out the paper on the kitchen counter, her eyes scanning words that seemed to shift and blur as she read them aloud in a whisper. Notice of expulsion. Disruptive behavior, failure to comply with conduct expectations. Her heart froze. Expulsion. The word carried a weight she knew too well. It was the word that had followed her in her own teenage years, stamped into her records like a scarlet letter she could never wash away. She remembered the shame of walking home after being told not to return, her mother too exhausted to fight. Her future narrowing with every adult who decided she was not worth the trouble. But Jasmine was only 8. A child who loved coloring books, who sang along to church hymns even when she didn't know all the words, who clung to Danielle's arm when thunderstorms rattled their apartment windows. The idea that someone could see her as a problem, as disposable, filled Danielle with a terror that quickly hardened into resolve. She read the notice again, eyes stinging, signed by Principal Raymond Cutter, stamped with the cold insignia of the school district. No explanation beyond vague accusations of defiance. No invitation to discuss. No meeting scheduled. No opportunity for her little girl to defend herself. Just a decision, final and absolute. Danielle turned the paper over as if the back might hold an apology or a mistake, but it was blank. She sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Jasmine laughed at something on the TV, her voice ringing out pure and untroubled. And Danielle felt the gulf between that innocent sound and the cruel formality of the letter. Her hands trembled as she folded it neatly, not crumpling it. She would need it later, she knew instinctively. Evidence. Her mind raced. Who do I call? What do I say? Will they even listen? She thought of the long shifts that barely covered rent, the babysitter she scraped together money for, the exhaustion that hung over her like a second skin. And yet, beneath all that, something stronger stirred. A memory of her mother's silence. The years of regret that had followed, Danielle vowed she would not be silent now. She glanced at Jasmine again, the girl's dark eyes wide with joy at a cartoon character's antics. How could anyone look at her and think she was nothing but trouble? Danielle felt her throat tighten. She rose, walked to the couch, and gently pulled her daughter into her arms. Jasmine looked up, puzzled. What's wrong, Mama? Nothing, baby, Danielle whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Nothing you did. You're perfect. But inside, she knew everything was wrong. That night, long after Jasmine had fallen asleep, Danielle sat by the small window of their apartment, the city street outside humming with sirens and distant laughter. She clutched the letter, reading and rereading, as if repetition might unlock some hidden meaning. She imagined herself walking into the principal's office, demanding an explanation, but the image crumbled under the weight of his authority. Men like Cutter didn't see women like her, not really. They saw numbers, statistics, burdens to shuffle away. The fear pressed hard, whispering that maybe this was the end of Jasmine's chance at something better. But just as quickly came another whisper, one stronger. No, not this time. By the time dawn seeped pale light into the kitchen, Danielle had made a decision. She would not let her daughter's future be decided by the stroke of a pen. If the system wanted to fight, she would fight back, even if she didn't yet know how. She folded the letter once more, slid it into the drawer with the unpaid bills, and exhaled a shaky breath. Tomorrow, she would go to the school. Tomorrow, the battle would begin. And as she finally lay down beside her sleeping daughter, the sound of Jasmine's steady breathing was the only proof Danielle needed that she had no choice but to keep going. The letter might have been written, but the story was far from finished. The next morning, the sun rose sluggishly through the blinds, streaking the apartment with pale gold. Danielle brewed instant coffee that tasted more like burnt paper than anything comforting, but she drank it anyway. She needed every ounce of strength. Jasmine sat at the table with her cereal, swinging her legs, unaware of the storm gathering around her. "Baby," Danielle said softly, brushing her daughter's braids back from her forehead. "At school yesterday, did something happen? Did you get in trouble?" Jasmine shrugged, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Mr. Cutter said I talked too much, but I was just answering questions. And I helped Marcus when he didn't understand the math." She frowned, her small brow furrowed. "He told me I was being disrespectful." Danielle's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to break something, to demand how speaking up in class could ever justify what that letter claimed. Instead, she took a slow breath, steadying her voice. "You didn't do anything wrong, Jasmine? Don't you ever think you did?" The girl nodded, but the shadow of doubt lingered in her eyes. Danielle felt it cut deep. That subtle wound, the kind planted early, when authority says you are less than you are. She had known it herself, and she would not let it root in her daughter's heart. By the time she walked Jasmine to school, the neighborhood was alive with the sounds of buses hissing and children shouting. The brick building loomed ahead, familiar yet suddenly hostile. Danielle's palms were damp as she pushed open the office door. Inside, the secretary looked up from her computer, lips pursed. "Can I help you?" The tone made clear she didn't mean help. "Yes," Danielle replied, forcing calm. She held up the folded letter. "I need to speak with Principal Cutter about this." The woman's eyes flicked over the page before her expression hardened. "He's in a meeting. You'll have to schedule an appointment." "I'll wait," Danielle said firmly. She sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs, the kind designed to discourage comfort. She crossed her legs and fixed her gaze on the clock above the doorway. Minutes stretched into an hour. Parents came and went. The secretary avoided her eyes. Finally, the principal's door opened, and a tall man in a gray suit stepped out, his face pinched with irritation. Raymond Cutter. His gaze slid across Danielle like she was part of the furniture, then snapped back when she rose to her feet. "I need to speak with you," she said. Her voice trembled at the edges, but she held his eyes. Cutter glanced at the secretary, who gave a subtle shake of her head, as if signaling this woman wasn't worth his time. But Danielle pressed on, thrusting the letter forward. "You're expelling my daughter. I want to know why." For a heartbeat, the hallway stilled. Cutter sighed, taking the paper as though it were a nuisance. Miss Freeman," she corrected. "Miss Freeman," he said coolly. "Your daughter has repeatedly disrupted class and shown a lack of respect for her teachers. We cannot allow one student to undermine the learning environment for others." "She's 8 years old," Danielle snapped. "She's a child who loves learning. She asks too many questions. That's not disruption. That's curiosity. How dare you put that word expulsion on her record without even speaking to me first?" Cutter's jaw tightened. "Our decision is final. If you have concerns, you can take them up with the school board. But I assure you, they will support our findings." The dismissal in his voice was a slap. Danielle felt her throat tighten, but she refused to look away. She gathered the letter back into her hands, holding it as though it were both a weapon and a wound. "You're wrong about her," she said quietly, "and I'm not letting you do this." She turned on her heel before he could answer, her pulse pounding in her ears. Jasmine was still in her classroom, unaware of the battle being waged in her name. Danielle stepped out into the sharp morning air, every nerve in her body lit with fear and fury. She had no lawyer, no connections, no idea where to even begin. But she knew this much. Silence would not save her daughter. As she walked home, the weight of the letter pressed harder in her bag. But so did something else. a stubborn flame, small but unyielding. Danielle Freeman had been underestimated her whole life. They had mistaken her quiet voice for weakness. This time, they would learn the difference. And so began the fight that would carry her into boardrooms, into courtrooms, and into the heart of a community forced to reckon with truths long ignored. The week that followed was a blur of unanswered calls and slammed doors. Danielle dialed the school board office 3 times a day, each time waiting on hold, until a tired voice told her that someone would return her message. No one ever did. When she stopped by in person, clutching the expulsion notice like evidence in a trial, the receptionist barely glanced at her before muttering that her case was under review. The phrase echoed like a death sentence, bureaucratic and cold. Her coworkers at the grocery store noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way her movements slowed as if she carried an invisible weight. One evening, as she rang up a line of customers, her friend Rosa leaned close. "You look like you've been carrying the world, Donnie. What's going on?" Danielle forced a smile, shaking her head. "Just tired." The truth was too raw, too humiliating to say out loud in the middle of a checkout lane. But at night when Jasmine slept, Danielle sat at the kitchen table with her phone scrolling through district policies and education laws. She barely understood her notebook filling with messy handwriting that blurred when her tears fell across the pages. Each attempt to fight back was met with indifference. When she finally reached someone from the superintendent's office, a clipped voice told her, "The principal has full authority to make disciplinary recommendations. If you feel the decision was unfair, you may request a review hearing in writing." The way the woman stressed the word request made it sound like a privilege she should be grateful for. Danielle scribbled down the instructions anyway, though she had no idea how to craft such a letter. Her own schooling had ended too soon, opportunities cut off before they could bloom. And now, the same blade of dismissal threatened to cut down Jasmine. At church that Sunday, Danielle sat in the back pew, her hands folded tightly, eyes fixed on the stained glass. The pastor's sermon washed over her without meaning, her mind replaying every rejection of the week. When the choir began to sing, the harmony stirred something inside her. But it was not comfort, it was longing, the ache for someone to tell her she was not crazy to fight. After service, she lingered in the shadows, unsure whether to slip out unseen. That was when a warm hand touched her shoulder. She turned to see Marjorie Ellis, the choir director, her presence steady as the hymn she led. "Child," Marjorie said softly, her voice carrying both gentleness and command. "I've been watching you these past Sundays. You carry a storm on your back. What's troubling you?" Danielle hesitated, the words caught in her throat. But the kindness in Marjorie's eyes unlocked something. She pulled the folded letter from her purse, pressing it into the older woman's hands. "They're trying to expel my Jasmine. She's only 8. They said she was disruptive, disrespectful, but she's not. She's just a little girl who loves school." Marjorie unfolded the paper carefully, her brow furrowing as she read. When she looked up, her gaze was sharper, cutting through the fog of Danielle's despair. "This isn't right. It's not by law, not by God. You don't have to face this alone." For the first time in days, Danielle felt a crack in the wall around her. She wanted to believe Marjorie's words, but fear clung stubbornly. "I don't have money for lawyers," she whispered. "You don't need money to stand for what's right," Marjorie said, "but you do need allies. And I think I know just the person who can help." Danielle followed Marjorie's eyes to the far side of the fellowship hall, where a woman with neatly pressed hair and a calm, unshakable posture was speaking to a small group. Marjorie leaned close. "That's Selena Wright. She works with a legal aid office downtown. She's helped families through storms like this before." Danielle clutched the letter tighter, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure if she was ready to step into another fight, not after a week of closed doors. But when Selena's gaze lifted and their eyes met across the room, Danielle felt something shift, a spark of recognition. As if this battle had already begun, and fate had placed the next piece in her path. Marjorie led Danielle across the room, her hand resting lightly on the young mother's back. The closer they drew, the more Danielle's nerves coiled tight. She had stood her ground in Cutter's office, but now she felt small again, out of her depth. A cashier walking into the world of people who spoke in laws and policies instead of survival and paychecks. "Selena," Marjorie called, her voice warm but purposeful. The woman turned, and up close Danielle could see that her calmness wasn't just surface. Selina Wright had the kind of presence that made chaos quiet down. She wore no flashy jewelry, no practiced smile, only the steady assurance of someone who knew what battles cost. "This is Danielle Freeman," Marjorie continued. "She needs help. The school is trying to expel her little girl." Selina's brow furrowed. She extended her hand and Danielle shook it, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "Tell me what happened," Selina said simply. The story tumbled out faster than Danielle expected, the letter in the backpack, the stone wall of the school board, Cutter's voice dismissing her like she was less than nothing. Selina listened without interruption, her eyes focused and unblinking. When Danielle finished, clutching the letter in her trembling hands, Selina took it and read in silence. Finally, she looked up. "This document is sloppy, vague. And if what you're telling me is true, they've skipped several steps they're required to take before even considering expulsion. Did they ever give you written warnings before this?" "No," Danielle said. "Not a single one. Jasmine's teacher never even called me." Selina exhaled slowly. "Then this isn't just unfair. It's unlawful." The word sent a shiver down Danielle's spine. For days she had been gaslit by official voices, told to accept what was handed to her. Now someone with knowledge was telling her she wasn't crazy. "But I can't afford," Danielle began. Selina held up a hand. "I don't charge for families like yours. I work with a legal aid office. The system counts on parents being too tired, too broke, too isolated to fight back. But when someone does, it changes things. Are you willing to fight, Miss Freeman?" Danielle blinked. The exhaustion of long shifts, the humiliation of unanswered calls, the fear of standing before people who dismissed her, all of it clashed against the image of Jasmine's small face, hopeful and bright, undeserving of any of this. She nodded slowly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, I'll fight." A flicker of approval crossed Selina's face. "Good, then we start by gathering everything. Notes from her teachers, attendance records, any communication you've had with the school. I'll draft a request for a hearing. They're counting on you giving up before it gets that far." Danielle clutched the letter tighter. "I don't even know where to start." "You start," Selina said, "by believing your daughter is worth the battle. The rest we'll handle step by step." Marjorie squeezed Danielle's arm. "See, child, you're not alone anymore." That night, Danielle walked home under the hum of streetlights. Jasmine skipping beside her with a song on her lips. The city's chill bit at her skin, but inside she carried something warmer, the faint but undeniable ember of hope. The doors might have slammed shut, but through Marjorie and Selina, a window had opened. And Danielle, for the first time since that crumpled letter appeared, felt herself breathe without the weight of fear pressing her chest. She still didn't know what the path ahead looked like, but she knew this much: she would not walk it alone. The battle was only beginning, and tomorrow would bring its own trials. But tonight, she held Jasmine's hand a little tighter, whispering silently to herself, "We are still standing." The following days blurred into a rhythm of whispered conversations and sleepless nights. After work, Danielle would head straight to Marjorie's modest home on Ashwood Lane, where the older woman brewed sweet tea and spread stacks of old church bulletins across the table as if they were legal briefs. Selina would arrive soon after, crisp folders tucked under her arm, her expression calm but intent. Danielle often felt like she had stepped into someone else's life, one where ordinary people plotted not survival, but strategy. It was new terrain, frightening and electrifying at the same time. She had always been told to stay in her lane, to accept the limits placed on her, yet here she was, sitting across from a paralegal who spoke of policy and precedent as if they were tools she could wield. On one of those evenings, Jasmine sat at the corner of the table, humming while she drew pictures with stubby crayons. She sketched her school as a tall red building with windows that looked like eyes. Danielle watched her daughter press hard into the paper, the crayon nearly breaking, wondered if the child already sensed the weight of the storm around her. Selina flipped through the principal's expulsion notice again, her finger tapping the margin. "They're trying to make this look routine," she said, her voice low but sharp. "But look closely, no dates, no documented incidents, no teacher reports. Just Cutter's signature. That's not protocol, it's power abuse." Danielle leaned forward. "So we can fight this." "We will fight this," Selina corrected. But you need to understand, Cutter won't back down quietly. My people like him thrive on fear and silence. The minute you resist, he'll double down. The words made Danielle's stomach twist, but she nodded. It then let him double. I'm not backing down. Marjorie chuckled softly, her eyes gleaming with pride. There's fire in you, child. Don't be afraid of it. That fire is what carried us through harder times than these. That night, Danielle returned home with a stack of papers to organize. Jasmine's report cards, notes from teachers praising her reading, even a certificate from a spelling bee she had won. As she placed them in a folder, her hands steadied. Each paper was proof, not just of innocence, but of worth. Still, fear crept in during the quiet hours. She wondered what Cutter might say in his defense, what stories he might twist. She imagined herself standing in a courtroom, her voice shaking while his rang with authority. Could she really match that? Her doubts followed her into sleep, where dreams blurred with memory, her teenage self sitting in a principal's office. Hearing the words, "You don't belong here," her mother silent beside her, resignation already written in her tired eyes. Danielle jolted awake, sweat dampening her pillow. She refused to let Jasmine live that same script. The following Sunday, whispers began circling through the church pews and neighborhood porches. Parents Danielle barely knew approached her with cautious glances, asking if it was true. Had Cutter really expelled an 8-year-old without warning? Some nodded knowingly, sharing their own stories. A nephew punished for speaking too loud. A niece sent home for attitude. Each tale carried the same undercurrent of fear and silence. Selena listened carefully, jotting down names. Patterns matter, she explained. When one voice rises, it sounds like noise. When many voices rise, it sounds like truth, Danielle realized. With a chill that was half terror and half exhilaration, that her fight was no longer just about Jasmine. It was about every child who had been silenced, every family who had been told to accept injustice quietly. And yet, she knew Cutter would not allow those whispers to spread without striking back. The shift became clear on Monday morning. When Danielle walked Jasmine into school, she could feel the weight of eyes on her teachers lingering in doorways, parents whispering near the flagpole. Cutter stood in the hall, speaking to another staff member, but his gaze tracked her like a hawk. The corner of his mouth tightened when he saw her holding Jasmine's hand. "Go on, baby," Danielle whispered, giving Jasmine's shoulders a gentle squeeze. The girl walked into her classroom, looking back once with a small wave. Danielle waved back, her heart heavy but steady. As she turned to leave, Cutter's voice rang out, "Miss Freeman." A word. She froze, then pivoted slowly, meeting his eyes. The smile was polite but sharp. "It's disruptive," he said smoothly, "for you to linger in the halls every morning. It makes teachers uneasy." Danielle lifted her chin. "It's disruptive," she replied, "to expel an 8-year-old without cause. Until this is resolved, I'll be here every morning and every afternoon. My daughter has a right to feel safe." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before the smile snapped back into place. "You're making a mistake, Miss Freeman. This kind of defiance won't help your daughter's future." Her pulse hammered, but she refused to flinch. "The mistake," she said softly, "was underestimating me." She walked away before he could respond. The echo of her footsteps loud against the polished floor. Behind her, Cutter's stare burned like a warning. That evening, she told Selena and Marjorie what had happened. Selena nodded grimly. "He's testing you, trying to scare you off. Expect more of that. He knows the board will stand behind him unless we bring proof he can't dismiss." Marjorie leaned back in her chair, her voice carrying the weight of lived memory. "These men, they've always used intimidation. But remember, storms can roar all they want. It's the steady river that carves the stone." Danielle drew strength from their words, though fear still curled in her chest. Each step forward felt like stepping into deeper water, but she also felt something she hadn't in years. Clarity. Every word Cutter spoke revealed his fear, not hers. The next Sunday, whispers turned to quiet conversations. Parents gathered in small knots after service, some hesitant, others angry. A mother with tired eyes confessed that her son had been written up for loitering when he stayed after class to ask questions. A father spoke about his daughter being barred from a school trip for attitude, though she had never been disciplined before. Each story was like another thread pulling at a tightly woven fabric. Selena wrote down every detail, promising discretion. They may not be ready to stand in the light yet, she explained, but their stories matter. And when the time comes, they may give us more than they know. Danielle listened, her resolve deepening. What had started as a fight for one child was quickly becoming a mirror held up to an entire system. And though Cutter's shadow loomed, though the board's silence pressed down like a lid, she felt something building beneath it all. A pressure, a truth that would not stay buried forever. When she walked Jasmine home that afternoon, the girl held her hand tight, swinging it back and forth with childish abandon. "Mama," Jasmine said, "when you talk to people at church, are you telling them about me?" Danielle smiled softly. "Yes, baby. I'm telling them the truth about you." "Good," Jasmine said, "because I don't want them to think I'm bad." Danielle's throat tightened. She knelt, pulling her daughter close, whispering into her hair. "Nobody who matters will ever think that. You hear me? Nobody." And in that moment, Danielle knew this wasn't only about law or justice. It was about preserving the light in her daughter's eyes, about refusing to let a system dim the spark of a child who dared to speak. The whispers in the shadows were growing louder. Soon, they would be impossible to ignore. By the time April arrived, the town had begun to hum with quiet tension. At the grocery store, Danielle noticed parents lowering their voices when she passed, some offering small nods of solidarity, others avoiding her eyes. On the church steps, conversation shifted when Cutter's name was mentioned, leaving a trail of unfinished sentences and clenched jaws. The unease was no longer confined to her and Jasmine. It was spilling into the lives of others, threading itself into Sunday hymns, PTA meetings, and whispered exchanges over fences. Danielle could feel the current moving beneath her feet. It wasn't an open flood yet, but the ground trembled with the weight of it. Still, she carried fear in her chest. Every morning as she braided Jasmine's hair, she wondered if today would be the day another notice came. Another letter on thick paper declaring, her daughter unworthy of the classroom. Selena worked tirelessly in the background. She spent long nights at her desk, surrounded by manila folders and stacks of handwritten notes. Each page a fragment of the bigger picture. The complaints from other parents revealed a pattern. Vague accusations, consistent punishments, and sudden policy changes that always seemed to target the same children. Her voice was calm when she shared the findings with Danielle and Marjorie, but her eyes betrayed the gravity of it. "This isn't incompetence," she said. "It's control. He's weaponizing authority because no one has challenged him in years." Marjorie's role became quieter, but no less powerful. She began weaving the story into sermons and choir rehearsals, never naming Cutter directly, but speaking of pharaohs who hardened their hearts, of shepherds who abandoned their flock. Her words lingered in the sanctuary air like incense, seeping into the minds of the congregation until people began to draw the parallels themselves. The shift reached Danielle most unexpectedly one afternoon, when she went to the post office. An older man she recognized only vaguely stepped forward, tipping his cap. "Ma'am," he said, voice low but steady, "you keep going. Folks are watching. Some of us are tired of being quiet." Danielle felt her chest tighten with gratitude. She nodded, managing a soft thank you. But the rumble of awakening also stirred the resistance of those invested in silence. A week later, a flyer appeared on community bulletin boards around town. Bold black letters accused Danielle of being a troublemaker, single mother looking for attention who was dragging the good name of the school. Through the mud, there was no signature, only the vague authority of anonymous malice. When Danielle saw it, her hands trembled. For a moment, shame flared like heat under her skin. But then she remembered Jasmine's small voice. "I daren't want them to think I am bad." And she steadied herself. She tore the flyer down, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. That night, she showed it to Selena. Selena studied it carefully, lips pressed tight. "This isn't random, it's coordinated. They want you isolated." Marjorie shook her head. "If they thought she was alone, they wouldn't bother trying to smear her." "Fear makes cowards shout." Danielle exhaled slowly. For the first time, she realized Cutter might be losing control. Whispers had turned to slander. It meant truth was already slipping into daylight. That the town was stirring, restless and divided. Each gesture of support was matched by a mutter of resistance, each quiet ally shadowed by a sneer. And Danielle knew the storm was building towards something none of them could yet name. The storm found its voice in the school board meeting. The room was cramped, its walls lined with folding chairs and parents fanning themselves with printed agendas. Cutter sat at the head of the long oak table, his suit pressed, his expression serene, as though nothing in the past weeks had shaken his certainty. But Danielle could feel the energy vibrating through the air, dozens of eyes shifting between her and him. Curiosity mingled with doubt. When the floor opened for public comment, a woman in her 50s stood and cleared her throat.
"Oh.
My son was suspended for being late twice," she said, her voice quivering. "I thought it was just us, but I've seen what's been happening to others. It doesn't feel right." Her words landed like stones dropped into a still pond. Murmurs rippled across the room. Cutter's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Another father rose next, taller, angrier. "My daughter was kept from honor roll because of a single tardy slip. Meanwhile, others skate by without consequence. If this is fairness, then I don't know what the word means anymore." His fist struck the palm of his hand. Danielle's chest swelled with a mixture of fear and hope. These weren't rehearsed speeches or allies brought in by Selena. They were ordinary parents who had decided the silence was heavier than the risk of speaking. Still, not everyone was ready to cross the line. One man stood up to defend Cutter, his voice sharp. "Principal Cutter has done more for this school than anyone. Discipline is what keeps order. Without it, our kids will run wild. Y'all just don't want rules applied to your children." He sat down to a scattered applause, a reminder that the room was far from united. Cutter finally spoke, his words polished, his tone dripping with calm authority. "Every decision made under my watch has been guided by the principles of discipline and respect. Treat every student equally. What we're hearing tonight are isolated grievances, magnified by rumor." He looked directly at Danielle as he said it, as though daring her to challenge him. Her palms were damp, her throat tight, but when Selena touched her elbow, Danielle found her voice. She stood, holding a folder of documents that trembled in her hands. "Rumor doesn't leave a paper trail," she said, forcing her voice steady. "But this does." She lifted the folder, pages marked with inconsistencies, suspensions, detentions, and exclusions, all pointing to a pattern. Gasps moved through the audience as she flipped through them. "This is not rumor. This is record. Records don't lie." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Cutter's composure faltered, just slightly a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a shadow across his brow. The board chair cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "We will review these documents in due course," he said stiffly. "This meeting is adjourned." He banged the gavel too quickly, as if afraid of what might erupt if the discussion went on. Parents shuffled out, some whispering to Danielle words of encouragement, others shaking their heads in dismissal. Ow. But the dam had cracked. Cutter's unchallenged reign was no longer absolute. The town was stirring awake, its people choosing sides in the dim light of the gymnasium. That night, Danielle lay in bed beside Jasmine, listening to the girl's soft breathing. The weight of the day pressed on her, but beneath it pulsed something new, not just survival, but momentum. For the first time, she believed they might not only withstand the storm, they might redirect it. The town had been stirred, and soon the courtroom would be shaken. The morning after the board meeting, whispers moved through Fairview faster than Sunday gossip. At the diner, waitresses leaned close to patrons, recounting how Danielle had stood against Cutter with papers in her trembling hands. At the barbershop, men replayed the moment she declared, "Records don't lie," their voices rising with admiration. Even at the laundromat, where Danielle sometimes folded clothes in silence, a stranger offered her a smile and said, "We heard. Good on you," but rumors twisted as they traveled. By midweek, Cutter's supporters had their own version of events, that Danielle had staged the records, that she was being manipulated by outsiders with an agenda, and that Cutter was being persecuted for enforcing rules everyone else was too cowardly to uphold. Flyers appeared again, this time with grainy photos of Danielle leaving the courthouse, accompanied by words like fraud and instigator. The pressure seeped into Danielle's daily life. At the grocery store, a woman muttered, shameful, as she walked past. But the same aisle brought a young father who whispered, "Keep fighting, we're with you." The contrast was dizzying. One moment her chest burned with humiliation. The next, it swelled with quiet courage. Selena urged her to stay the course. "Rumor is smoke," she said, tapping her pen against the growing pile of evidence. "It clouds vision, but it cannot change the fire at the center. Our job is to keep the fire lit." Her steady composure anchored Danielle, who sometimes felt her spirit fray at the edges. Meanwhile, Marjorie became a beacon in subtle ways. Her sermons grew more pointed, drawing on parables of justice delayed but not denied. The choir's voices swelled with an urgency that made congregants weep. And after each rehearsal, she lingered to listen to the stories of mothers and fathers who had quietly endured unfair treatment, their words weaving into a tapestry of communal grief and defiance. But the most unexpected revelation came from Jasmine herself. One night as Danielle tucked her in, the girl whispered, "Mama, my friend said her brother got sent home for nothing too. She said her mama is scared to talk about it. Why are they scared?" Danielle felt her throat tighten. She brushed Jasmine's hair back from her forehead. "'Cause sometimes people in charge make others believe they're untouchable. That makes folks afraid." Jasmine looked up, eyes wide with innocence and wisdom far too old for her age. "But you weren't afraid." Danielle swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I was, baby. But I did it anyway." The child's words hung in the air, heavier than any sermon. They were a reminder that this fight was not just about policy or paperwork. It was about teaching the next generation that fear didn't have to be the final word. And as the rumors spread and the town wrestled with its conscience, Danielle realized the battle was shifting. What had begun as one mother against a principal was becoming something larger, a reckoning with silence itself. The reckoning crystallized one Friday evening in the fellowship hall of Marjorie's church. Folding chairs filled the space, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fried chicken donated by parishioners. At first the gathering felt like any other community meeting, murmured greetings. Children chasing each other between legs, elders settling into their favorite corners. But as the conversations deepened, the room shifted into something else entirely. One by one, parents began to share. A mother recounted how her son had been written up for disrespect after asking too many questions in class. A father described his daughter being pulled from an advanced reading group without explanation. Another woman admitted, voice trembling, that her nephew had been told, "This school isn't for kids like you." Each story struck the air like a bell, resonating, layering, creating a chorus of injustice too loud to dismiss. But Danielle sat in the middle of it all, stunned by the flood of testimonies. Until that night, she had believed Jasmine's expulsion was a cruel exception, her own private battle. Now she saw the pattern stretching wide. Threads woven through the lives of families who had borne it quietly, each believing they were alone. Her fight had simply lit the match that revealed the scale of the fire. Selena stood to speak, her tone even but charged with purpose. "These stories are not isolated. They are evidence. Evidence of a system that relies on silence to survive. Tonight you've broken that silence, but breaking it is only the first step. We must be ready to stand together in court and meetings in the public eye. One voice can be dismissed as rumor. Many voices cannot." Applause thundered through the hall, a sound that shook Danielle to her core. It wasn't polite or cautious. It was raw, alive, born of years of pent-up frustration now finding release. Marjorie closed the gathering with a prayer, but her words carried the weight of a charge. "Let us be bold," she said, her voice echoing against the cinder-block walls. "Let us be steadfast. And let us remember that justice is not a gift handed down, but a truth we claim together." As the crowd dispersed, Danielle lingered near the doorway. People clasped her hand, hugged her, whispered blessings in her ear.
Ow.
For every glare she received in the grocery store, here she felt the balance tipping toward something stronger than fear. Walking home under the spring night sky, she thought of Jasmine's question. Why are they scared? The answer, she realized, was changing. They had been scared because they thought they were alone. Now they were beginning to understand that they weren't. The rumors had tried to divide them, but the revelations had bound them tighter. And Danielle, who had once stood trembling in a fluorescent-lit office with nothing but her voice, now walked with the knowledge that she was part of something larger. Something that would not go quietly back into the shadows. The town was no longer just stirring, it was rising. The courthouse in Fairview was an old red brick building with high windows that seemed to watch everyone who entered. On the morning of the hearing, Danielle stood at the base of its stone steps with Jasmine's hand in hers. The child's small fingers clutched tightly, as though she sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. Danielle smoothed the bow in her daughter's hair, whispering, "Whatever happens, remember you belong." Selena met them at the doors, her suit crisp, her binder heavy with documents. Marjorie followed soon after, dressed in her Sunday best, carrying a hymnal tucked under her arm, as though it were both shield and torch. They were not a legal team in the conventional sense, but they carried something Cutter could not summon: lived truth, community strength, and the resolve of people who had tasted injustice and refused to swallow it again. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Parents who had spoken up in the fellowship hall filled the benches, their presence silent testimony. Reporters from nearby towns scribbled in notepads, hungry for a story. At the front, Principal Cutter sat stiff-backed with his lawyer, his eyes fixed forward, jaw set like stone. He exuded the confidence of a man who believed institutions would always bend in his favor. When the judge entered, the murmurs hushed. The gavel struck wood, and the proceedings began. Cutter's attorney launched into a polished argument about school discipline, citing rules and policies as though they were holy scripture. The principal acted within his rights to enforce standards. He declared, "Expulsion was a measured response to repeated disruption. Any claims otherwise are the result of parental dissatisfaction, not administrative misconduct." His words flowed smooth and sharp, like a blade honed for years. Danielle sat frozen, her heart pounding. Every phrase seemed designed to erase Jasmine, to paint her as a problem rather than a child. But then Selena rose. She did not rush. She placed a single sheet of paper on the podium and looked directly at the judge. Her voice was even deliberate. "This case is not about rules," she began. "It is about patterns. Patterns of unequal treatment, documented across years, targeting certain students disproportionately. What happened to Jasmine Freeman is not an isolated decision. It is part of a system designed to silence children who should be nurtured." She presented records one by one, suspensions for minor infractions, consistencies in discipline, a striking imbalance that revealed itself in black and white. Gasps stirred the courtroom as each page was displayed. Danielle watched Cutter shift in his seat for the first time, his lawyer's mask slipping into irritation. But it was when Danielle herself took the stand that the room truly trembled. Her voice shook at first as she recounted the meeting in Cutter's office. Jasmine's small voice asking, "Am I bad, Mama?" The words echoed in the silent chamber, striking deeper than any statistic. Her tears glistened, but her posture was steady. "My daughter is not a disruption. She is a child, yours bright, kind, and worthy of the same education as any other student in this town." The judge's face remained unreadable, but the jury of public opinion in the benches had already shifted. Danielle could feel it in the air, the hush, the leaning forward, the eyes fixed on her, not with pity, but with recognition. For the first time since the nightmare began, Danielle sensed the ground beneath Cutter's feet was no longer solid. The courthouse itself seemed to breathe with anticipation, as though waiting to see whether truth would be enough to fracture power. The silence after Danielle's testimony was thick enough to press against the walls. Cutter's attorney rose quickly, eager to regain control. He paced, adjusting his tie, his words dripping with practiced disdain. "This is a mother's emotion clouding judgment. Schools cannot be run by sentiment. If every parent dictated discipline, order would collapse." He turned toward Danielle, voice sharpening. "This is not about dignity, it is about rules." But the words fell flat. The parents in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, their faces hard with recognition. They had heard this kind of dismissal before, the casual reduction of lived pain into exaggeration, the brushing aside of injustice as mere perception. It no longer convinced them. Selena stood again, calm but unyielding. "Rules mean nothing without fairness," she said, holding Cutter's gaze. "Authority is not a blank check, it is a trust. And when that trust is broken, it is not just a child who suffers, it is the whole community. This case is not about one expulsion, it is about whether the people of this town will allow silence to continue covering inequity." Her words rang in the vaulted chamber, and for the first time, Cutter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering with a furrowed brow. The aura of unshakable control that had cloaked him since the beginning now showed cracks. Marjorie, who had sat quietly until then, opened her hymnal. At first, the soft hum of her voice seemed almost inappropriate in the solemn courtroom. But slowly, deliberately, she sang a line of an old spiritual, "And before I'd be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave." A murmur rippled across the benches. Then another voice joined her, then another. Soon the courtroom filled with a haunting cadence of resistance carried across generations. The judge's gavel struck sharply, demanding order. But even he could not completely still the current that had been unleashed. Danielle sat with Jasmine's hand in hers, tears blurring her vision. For years she had felt small, unseen, pressed into silence by forces too large to confront. But in that moment, with voices rising around her, she understood they were not small at all. The session ended without a ruling. The judge promised a thorough review of the evidence, his expression careful, his tone neutral. But everyone in the room knew something irreversible had happened. Cutter had been forced to face the truth in public, and the community had seen it with their own eyes. As Danielle walked out onto the courthouse steps, reporters surged forward, microphones and cameras flashing. But before she could speak, the crowd of parents surrounded her, their presence forming a shield. Some placed hands on her shoulders. Others lifted their children so Jasmine could see she wasn't alone. The courthouse had not yet delivered justice, but it had trembled with the weight of possibility. And for Danielle, that tremor was enough to prove the ground beneath them was shifting. The battle was not over, but the silence had been broken, and there was no turning back. The verdict came weeks later on a humid afternoon when the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Danielle had spent the morning pacing her small living room, the clock ticking too loudly on the wall, Jasmine coloring quietly at the kitchen table. Every ring of the phone made her flinch. When Selena finally called, her voice was steady, almost too steady as she said, "They've reached a decision. Meet me at the courthouse." The walk up those stone steps felt heavier than ever before. Danielle's palms were damp, her chest tight, as if the outcome already pressed against her ribs. Neighbors, and even strangers who had followed the case. They filled the benches once again, their presence a living reminder that this battle had never truly been hers alone. The judge read the decision in a measured tone, every word weighed like an iron bell. "The expulsion of Danielle Freeman is hereby overturned." A gasp swept through the courtroom. Danielle's knees nearly buckled, relief flooding her body in a wave so strong she gripped the bench to steady herself. Jasmine would go back to school. She had won that much. But the ruling did not stop there. The judge continued, citing a troubling pattern of disciplinary inconsistency that warranted further review by the district. He ordered an investigation into administrative practices under Principal Cutter's leadership. That single phrase, "further review," sent a ripple of electricity through the room. For years, Cutter's authority had seemed untouchable. Now the system itself was being forced to look inward. Cutter sat rigid, his face pale, his jaw clenched, did not stand to address the court. For the first time, he looked less like an immovable pillar and more like a man cornered by truth. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted into the hot air. Danielle felt her throat tighten, the words nearly catching. But then, she remembered Jasmine's question. Why are they scared? And the answer she had promised to live. She stepped forward. "My daughter belongs," she said, her voice clear. "Every child in this town belongs. Today is not the end. It is the beginning of making sure no parent, no student ever feels they are alone in this fight." The crowd erupted in applause, not polite but thunderous, echoing off the courthouse walls, until it seemed the entire town could hear. And as Danielle looked out at the sea of faces, weary, hopeful, determined, she knew the verdict was more than a legal ruling. It was a line drawn in history, a fracture in the silence that had smothered too many for too long. In the days that followed, Fairview felt transformed. It wasn't that injustice had vanished overnight, or that Cutter had suddenly disappeared from the school. But the air itself carried a different weight, lighter for some, heavier for others. Parents who once kept their heads down now stopped Danielle in the street to share stories, emboldened by the ruling. Children who had been silenced by fear began to walk into classrooms with a little more confidence, their shoulders squared. At church the following Sunday, Marjorie led the choir in a hymn so powerful it rattled the stained glass windows. The congregation stood, clapping and singing until the walls seemed to pulse with joy. For the first time in months, Danielle let herself smile without reserve. She watched Jasmine in the front pew, her face glowing as she mouthed the words she had learned from her mother's lips. I belong. Selena remained cautious, reminding everyone that investigations took time, that systems had a way of protecting themselves. But even she allowed a small smile when she said, this was a crack in the wall. Once the light gets in, it cannot be shut out. Cutter walked the hallways of the school more stiffly than before. He no longer carried the same unquestioned authority. Whispers followed him, and teachers who had once nodded in silent compliance now exchanged glances that suggested their patience was thinning. He was still principal, but no longer untouchable. For Danielle, the greatest victory was not just Jasmine's return to class, but the way her daughter's eyes had changed. No longer clouded by shame, they now held a brightness that spoke of possibility. One afternoon, Jasmine skipped through the front door, holding up a gold star from her teacher. See, Mama? I told you I could do it. Danielle hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of triumph seep into her bones. She had fought for her daughter's dignity, but in doing so, she had also helped carve out space for every child who came after. The struggle was far from over, but the courtroom had shaken. The silence had cracked, and Fairview had been forced to listen. And for Danielle Freeman, that was enough to begin again. Not as a lone mother fighting in the shadows, but as part of a rising chorus that refused to be silenced. From the first trembling knock on the principal's office door to the echoing applause on the courthouse steps, Danielle's journey revealed a truth too often hidden. Power bends only when ordinary people dare to stand. Her courage reminded Fairview and all who watched that justice is not granted by those in authority, but claimed by those who believe their children, their families, their community are worth the fight. The courtroom shook because one mother refused to let silence define her daughter's future. And in that shaking, a new kind of strength was born.